I'm Mary with NORML.
I'm going to stand back here. I got a loud voice. We're going to bring the panelists or the presenters back up for panel. We had a couple questions that Steve, I think, went around and collected from people. And then if there's more questions that don't get answered and we have time, we can take some more questions. So if we want to, Dr. Harold and the folks from Flowered Wellness, if you want to come up.
A variety of perspectives, so obviously we can keep it within medical cannabis, but if you feel inspired to bring it a little beyond that, I'm sure we could have a great conversation. So does anyone have a burning question to start?
As a physician who's licensed to practice medicine in New York State, who actually became certified about 10 months ago, but is reluctant to pull the trigger because of the issues that you mentioned in regards to the actual prescribing and what are we treating and how are we treating it and everything else that goes along with it. And you all how did you get started in regards to the legal side? You know, insurance-wise, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I guess I can answer. You're talking about like insurance coverage for the patient?
No. As
practitioner.
As myself.
As far as I know, the practitioner that we work with hasn't had any issues with regard to, talking about like liability insurance. Yeah.
So it's medical practice.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're providing as a medical cannabis certifier is a consultation. You're not touching products. You're not prescribing. You're recommending, and you're certifying. That's strictly it. So from a perspective of an insurer, you're not doing anything outside of the scope of your practice. Yeah.
So from a provider's perspective, when you go through your visit, as a provider, you're basically only billing an E&M code.
Okay.
So that is as far as it goes. You're generating a diagnosis through an evaluation, and then from that comes a recommendation versus a prescription. So there's a certain level of gray area in the liability zone, but as far as how you're conducting the back end, it's an E&M code that then the patient can have that covered by insurance if you're participating, and then it results in a diagnosis and a recommendation.
There's other implications with, being on a state level as opposed to a federal level, and Dr. Smith touched on that a little bit, where money is coming from, who is influencing where that money is coming from. Those are all factors. So just remember that, you're following state laws and guidelines, but on the federal level, that's a different ball of wax.
And it hasn't affected your DEA at all?
Well, you're part of the qualifications of being a licensed registered certifier is also being registered with the drug reporting entity.
Yeah,
that's
what
oh yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
That's what I'm asking.
So you're still obligated to report any negative side effect or interaction that comes from that, and you have to be registered with or certified or registered with that registry.
The question I'm asking is that in the past, 10 months you guys have been doing your thing?
A year longer.
You haven't had the DEA contact you, come to your office, investigate you, look at your books, even though it's legal in New York State, it's still a Schedule 1.
If I could just add, there's no official bill or anything that's been passed at the federal level that says leave the states alone, but there is an unofficial memo that's been sent out, and we have seen, as long as you're following the state's laws, the federal government's going to leave you alone. So, and it's a memo, like I said, but we are trying to get legislation passed through to make it law.
I was going to say it's speculation at this point, but my feeling is that that's kind of where the federal government is going to go. I don't think they're going to put out a bill that's going to legalize anything on the federal level, but what they might do is say the states can decide and implement their own rules and regulations.
Anticipation is an important thing in this industry. And as a doctor, you know, many times you will have on hand samples that patients can try, and they are drawn to that because it gets them into seeing if something works at no cost. And I would say your liability will increase if you start storing samples in your office. Right now, you are advising patients they're going somewhere else to get product, and that keeps you clean. It's at arm's length. So when someone comes up to you and starts asking about storing a bunch of salves and lingual drops and all, it's you probably best right now to stay quote unquote clean on that.
Yes.
Okay.
From a company standpoint, because we don't specifically certify, we facilitate and have a relationship with the certifier. So we offset that risk for the practitioner, to what Dr. Smith was just saying. You know, so you keeping yourself at arm's length. You know, your DEA registration number is required as part of the certification process, but it should not be in jeopardy.
So I'm confused about what you do. So
Sure.
do you have over-the-counter products, like you have some of that, and you facilitate working with medical marijuana?
Correct. Yeah, so our company does carry, and we vet certain companies for hemp-derived products, and we're able to sell those as a retailer. But we also specialize in working with a medical marijuana certifier and helping facilitate that transaction and that relationship with the certifier. Did you follow?
Yeah, that doesn't seems like you should separate your milk from your meat. You know, it seems to me that that's not,
I'm not sure I understand.
well, that's not, to me, that's not a kosher way of doing it. If you're medical because medical has to meet certain criteria. Their products have to
Right.
be within narrow parameters. Their products have to be tested. They have to meet certain
Right.
restrictions from the state. So this, to me, I would want to go to somebody who's just dealing with medical, not somebody who's potentially over the counter. And what the doctor was saying earlier, where you don't necessarily, you have 500 milligrams in
Right.
this product, you don't know what that's going to do to somebody.
Right,
To
but the
me,
current-
my choice would be not to do business there, but that's my choice.
No, I understand, and that completely is your choice. What I would say is that people are consuming these products already, and it's the Wild West, and you have no idea where. I mean, there's CBD products that are sold in gas stations, head shops, smoke shops, all over the place.
Back in the world.
People do not know where to go to get a reliable, and granted, it is questionable at this moment what is reliable and what isn't, but people don't know where to go and where to even get those answers right now. So yes, we are working in hemp retail. We are also working with the medical cannabis program because we understand that education and that understanding of the industry is so important. We don't carry hemp retail products to push onto people. We carry them to showcase what a consumer should be looking for when they do purchase a hemp-derived product. So understand, you know, to what Dr. Smith was saying, 500 milligrams on a bottle means nothing to you. But when you're buying a product and you see 500 milligrams, what does that mean to you in that moment? How much are you taking per dose? Are you dosing properly? Are you actually taking the physical product in your mouth and holding it where it should be for the appropriate amount of time? Are you addressing all your concerns and issues that you were looking to in the first place? People are doing this regardless. So what we're setting ourselves up to do is to just kind of translate the information for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that it's just, for me personally, I were looking based on what I know. If I wanted medical, I'd be going straight medical, not.
Well, we don't provide that medical certification, the practitioner.
Right,
does.
I understand,
Yeah.
but to me, I know a lot of people who are very confused about this. To me, to a layperson, what you do may add a level of confusion initially.
I can respect that for sure. And then I'd love to talk to you more about that after.
Are you talking about the difference between recreational products and medicinal products?
I guess to me, medicinal can be medical marijuana as under New York State. Medicinal is a big word. Somebody could be taking a CBD from back there is medicinal. So which could also be recreational. So I'm talking about what is deemed in the medical marijuana program versus not at this point in New York State.
Yeah.
We can move on.
So, well, to comment on that, the harsh reality is what physicians and even pharmacists in the dispensaries actually know about the products that they're giving people is there's a huge gap and void there. So even the pharmacists in the dispensaries and the people certifying don't know as much as you think they should know. And that's why we're putting ourselves at the front of the industry to ensure that the education is getting out there. And that's another reason why we're putting ourselves next to over-the-counter product so that we know and understand what our product is up to the level of what the research understands it as, and we can recommend up to the level of what we already know. So it's our responsibility to stay ahead of, on top of the research, up to what we know in this moment and make our best recommendations. So medicinal is a broad word, but if you're only defining medicinal as a level of THC, then that kind of almost disrespects the plant, because you're talking about cannabis as a whole, and hemp falls within that. So if we know and understand the plant up to the point of that we understand it currently, then we can also utilize hemp as much as we can based on what we know. Does that make sense?
It does, and that goes back to my point that I said to Dr. Smith earlier, where the academic medical institutions in this state and this country are abrogating their responsibility.
Absolutely, for sure.
We're only able to operate in the industry with what we're given.
Based on what you know, and you've got one eye blind and hand tied behind your back.
Yeah, and it's an important distinction too. We talked about this before we went on earlier. That line of 0.3% THC is the federal government's standing. It's different in Europe. It's, you know, what you see as a hemp plant and a marijuana plant are different than what the federal government sees. I just want to make that known.
Plus, they're standing in the way of a lot of research into it, so, you know, she wouldn't know, you know, because they're blocking research into it, and yet
It's not accessible.
still all this other stuff that's been researched. Everybody that knows, everybody that's ever smoked pot knows that when you watch TV ads, pot didn't do that to me. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And so that should be taken into consideration even by the federal government.
No,
You know, but they're standing in the way. Why are they standing in the way? Because maybe their pharmaceuticals are keeping them from doing that.
We're moving on from an 80-plus year prohibition.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
gonna
That's
take
what
some
needs to
time.
happen.
Yeah. You have a question?
Yes, so I'm actually an occupational therapist and I work in a school-based setting, and I've had some like parents or friends even just ask me about CBD. So like even I didn't, as a healthcare practitioner, I didn't really know a ton about it. So
Yeah.
I felt like it is my responsibility to know that stuff so that when I do have clients asking about information, I can provide them with accurate research-based data. So I just completed a certification course online to become a holistic cannabis practitioner, and I spent over 2 months studying it. And what I'd love to is just be able to even just provide some more of that education to other healthcare practitioners, but like my clients as well. But I didn't know, is there anything around that already provides education to other doctors even? Because it is scary. Like doctors would be afraid of losing their licenses. Even me, I'm afraid like if someone asks me and I give them a wrong answer, like, and so I can understand why that fear is there, but then also doctors don't just all have that background right away because it's so new and upcoming, and the research is just beginning to get there because of the legalities that are passing.
That topic is so multifaceted because it's, so my background's in occupational therapy, and I worked in a school-based setting for several years, and so I completely, I saw you nodding when I was talking about certain things up there, and I was like, I got a feeling over here that she's going to. But you got to be careful from a legal perspective that you're staying within your scope of practice.
Yeah,
So
and I know we
stress
just
the most.
provide education on promotion of health and wellness, so I'm like,
Right.
what if people are seeking some of those things beforehand to, if they have that hereditary component or something, and they want to use it as like preventative management, just like you would fitness or like stress management techniques and stuff.
What you're talking about from an educational perspective for physicians and practitioners, that's specifically what we're working on at Flower Wellness. Lisa has been combing through all the research available to her possible, and then linking up with minds like Dr. Smith and getting access to that information so that we can educate people like you.
Yeah, they give a lot of great information on the medical marijuana program that like no one person just walking on the street or even just a regular person seeing their physician would have any idea.
Right. And for us, you know, I don't tout that I'm an expert in any of this, but we've been operating for 1.5 years now, and we have learned a considerable amount of information with regards to compliance, being up to date in legal sense in New York State, and then, you know, making sure you're not crossing any lines with what your scope of practice is really important.
Yeah.
And
I'm
Lisa,
still trying to figure out how to bring that up.
totally. I would love to talk to you more about that after. OT is something that we would love to bring into the facility that we're working on and incorporating that, because I think it's a tremendous path to get to the end of cannabis. This is applications right there.
Yeah, this is for Dr. Smith. Again, thank you guys all for coming here and sharing your expertise. We appreciate it. But I have two questions that are both related in regards to drug discovery. Do you think that cannabis should be held to the same strict scientific rigor as traditional, you know, Western medicine and pharmaceuticals, considering what we know about, I guess, lack for a better word, lack of lethality of cannabis? And off that, do you think it's even possible to use traditional drug discovery methods, considering that, you know, traditional Western medicine is really molecularized down to one molecule, and what we know is that cannabis works better as a full spectrum medicine? Do you think we're going to have to open up the arena of new methods of scientific discovery?
So I will answer that by saying much of what you're questioning whether we should is actually already in place within the drug discovery community. And the case in point is that, to your latter part, are we looking at full spectrum products and how can we possibly deal with that? And the scientific community has a method. You reduce down to a simple question that has a simple answer, and then you add to that and see if it's still true. And then you add to that. So this is the art of doing good science, knowing what the simple question is. Take example for HIV. It started out as looking for single drugs that would do it, and we realized that the virus escapes from single drugs. So as other people were discovering new drugs that were not on the same target in the cell, it became clear that adding those two together at the same time did a double whammy on the virus. We're at the quad now, which is 4 drugs in one pill to manage it. So essentially the pharmaceutical industry is managing multiple modalities happening, and the end result is healthy person, right? So that science has the bandwidth and the capacity to handle that because of what's called scientific method. I think there's 2 industries to answer your first question. One is, why are nutraceuticals all over the shelves without validation? And no one's stopping that, and that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And then there is compounds that are being used for drugs. For example, you can get prescribed vitamin B12 injections for low energy and blood maintenance problems. But you could also take a pill that claims that it's going to do all those things. So the cannabis industry is going to slot, and there's going to be high criteria for something that a doctor can prescribe. And that's going to go through the rigor that we talked about. All the data necessary to satisfy skeptics at the FDA. And then eventually clinical trials and tests. There'll be another part of this that is 500 milligrams, full spectrum cannabis, put it on your skin, smells like raspberries. You know, I mean, it's just, that's going to be there, and there's no way to stop that because it's already part of the industry. So the business model has this separation of pieces, but the drug discovery model for cannabis will, everything has to be cleared by the FDA. None of the nutraceuticals are cleared by the FDA. So if we're going to actually reach the credibility of my doctor prescribed this to me for glaucoma, it has to actually go through the rigor of what we consider drug discovery, preclinical drug discovery, and then clinical drug discovery. Is that?
Just like one question for everyone out there. What would be the one major change that you would make to the medical program now, or like to even recreational, what you would want to have?
I've been asked this before. The number one thing that needs to happen is THC needs to be descheduled. It's the biggest barrier to the industry right now. I'm curious what you would think of that.
You know, so to the argument that came here, the other thing that's coming up is, you know, it's like whack-a-mole. When you try to get something going forward, everyone has an opinion, and then of course it's coming up. The most recent opinion that's coming from the Monroe County Health is that we don't know how to test for this when people are taking it. how would someone who is supposed to take it get dosed in school? So this is to your comment. So it's just like giving any drug, you're going to have to learn what you can do for cannabis. What about what is driving impaired to me? So all these things are coming up. And so, you know, how you're going to nail someone for using cannabis, THC, because of what you can test in their hair versus what you test in their lungs. And all this is like, I don't know how to do that. And among all the no, I don't know how to do, it's being trumped forwards as the reason why we shouldn't move forwards on this at all. And it's like playing whack-a-mole. You know, it's like, yeah, okay, kids really shouldn't be getting high and trying to understand geography because, you know, it doesn't work in school, right? It just doesn't work in school. And so we have to be respectful of what the young person needs to develop a healthy mind and motivation. Likewise, adults, I think, you know, have to have a different criteria. So this is what I think. There's a lot of criteria coming up that's blocking, and not all of them have answers, and that's really good for our opponents. When we don't have answers for things, that's great. All right, we can't go forward because we just don't have answers for them. So we need to solve some of these things. There needs to be good testing. There needs to be some person who steps forward with a rational mind and says, hey, we're not talking about kids going to school getting high. Okay, if they are, they need to be counseled and corrected that they don't do that. If they're taking THC for epilepsy, people in the school system have to understand what that is and when it's necessary to dose a child during the school system. Those are things that we can solve. We're not really solving it right now because we're...
This has happened before, and we'll get there eventually. I mean, when peanut allergies became a big thing, and we had to store EpiPens in schools, and people had to be trained on how to help a child that's having an anaphylactic reaction. You know, I equate it to that. You know, there's a learning curve, and finding out how to test a person and understanding what level of influence they're under from the plant at this moment, we're not able to do yet. I mean, there's definitely people out there that are working towards that.
But your point to the general problem of this fear of THC.
Yeah.
It's basically, it's another one of those things that someone will stick in your path. And now you're going to have to deal. Well, what about THC? Well, what about THC?
It's a fear mongering that, you know, like for instance, alcohol. You drink alcohol. I've drunk alcohol and blacked out. Blackout is where you don't remember anything you've done. But I've smoked pot all night and remembered everything that happened. So it's kind of like the fear mongering is that they're attacking a drug that is far less dangerous than alcohol. And so many people need to realize
it's more fundamental than that, because you're doing what almost everyone does that we talk to, is they're equating cannabis to alcohol and tobacco. Right. And it's not there. You can't.
Yeah, you can't compare them. But the point that I'm making is that the federal government is constantly attacking marijuana when they allow so much more dangerous stuff to be allowed and pushed on the public.
It's a nuanced situation. There's so many different
such
factors.
hypocrisy, right?
The human condition, right? We're not really, like my talk was about what's in our body that is receiving the chemistry and stuff. The same thing is the human body and the human mind. There are some people who are prone to compulsive behavior. And if it's not alcohol, it's something else, but it will just constantly drive their lives. And I would argue if those people are going to enjoy a productive life, maybe they need to interface with some counseling to understand alternative outlets. But that marijuana is necessarily like the gateway drug, that it's going to basically cause madness and all this thing. I think we're way past that now.
Yeah.
Just the fact that we're having this conversation, we understand we're past that point. We can't forget that someone could use it in a way that's not appropriate for them. And how do we understand where that line is for everyone?
I mean, same thing with the food industry. I mean, you know, I haven't smoked marijuana in 5 years, but I started eating more, you know? It's like, so it's always going to be something, you know, they're trying to make it look like we live in a world where we can't do anything that could harm us. And everything is going to harm you one way or another. And so they have this cowardice approach that the federal government has, where they're obviously trying to be a little too strict on cannabis. You can call it a herbal supplement. I've heard about herbal supplements that are on the shelves every store you go into that's not FDA approved.
This is a discussion that's happening right now. All this is going to come out. This is a very fluid industry, and lots of changes are going to be coming in the next year, and all that is really going to be addressed. I was told we have one more question.
Yeah.
This gentleman right here.
This lady in blue had a question.
Wait, okay, we can do two more here and then.
Yeah, I wanted you were waiting patiently.
Yeah, thank you. This actually for you. You touched on briefly after you walk your, do you call them customers or what would you call your clients?
Depends on what service they're clients of ours. If they're just looking for a consultation, they're a patient of the practitioner. If they're going to enter
So your clientele, after you walk them through the registration process, if they're looking for that, you kind of touched on it briefly. What do you see with like repeat people that use your services after that initial, that after you make that link? And then secondly, like as your state program evolves, how do you see your practice or your wellness center evolve?
Awesome questions. So the practitioners have quite a bit of leeway in certain ways, and one of them is the follow-up appointments. Right now, you can certify a patient. There's really no rules and regulations with how you follow up and maintain that certification. You can give a patient, as a practitioner, you can give a certification for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, up to a year, and then you're required to do a recertification. A follow-up appointment, the practitioner that we work with maintains one follow-up appointment, but we also do informal follow-ups as well. So it really depends on where you go and who you talk to. Some facilities require every 3 months you have to come in for a follow-up appointment. That's just something as a patient or a consumer, you got to figure out what's the better option for you. There's also, beyond that, certain restrictions that a practitioner can put in place. They make recommendations to the pharmacist at the dispensary. A practitioner can say, you're only allowed this specific product or this specific ratio of THC to CBD, and that's all you have access to at the dispensary. Some practitioners are a little more open to it, and you can talk to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist can even make a recommendation to you. It's not a clear-cut situation as far as that goes. The second part of your question.
I was just wondering what you see your wellness center evolving into if we were to take models of other states.
Yeah, so we're setting ourselves up to really be an educational-based company. So the industry evolving and adult use coming into play isn't going to stop us from getting even more involved in the educational aspect and working with these different practitioners. The facility that we're opening, once adult use comes into play, it will evolve with that. So I don't think it's a hindrance. Right now, because we're still pretty new, we're coming out of our startup phase, the fact that adult use didn't pass is a benefit to us, I'm not gonna lie. It gives us more time. I think it gives the whole state a little more time to really figure things out. I don't see it as a problem.
And I think we have one more question. Do you have a question?
Yeah, Dr. Smith wanted to. Oh yeah.
Oh, in regards to research, is there a way to do this sort of science and do research legally, or is it only through the private entity at this point?
You can do research, but you have to get access to substance. And if you get access to substance to test, then you have to show that you have an association with a company like Brinks that is monitoring with cameras, that you have a 600-pound safe that can't be moved, cemented into the floor, where you store your product, that you have regular surveillance, that you have documentation, a disposal mechanism for whatever waste products come out, and that someone legitimately can pick up that waste and dispose of it in an incinerator or something like that. So that's the ante. For my company, that is about $150,000 to put that into place. And I haven't bought a lick of science of pipette or hired anyone.
Plus that cannabis has to come from the federal government, which is not.
Right now there's one.
It's the worst of the worst.
And so So what I'm thinking is hemp testing in New York is probably the most practical and most broadly appreciated testing that you can bring to people. There's all sorts of strains of hemp, and they have varying chemistry. So the question is, how does some part of your body respond to that, and is that what you're targeting? And that's good for now, and essentially THC is a known kind of thing, so the fact that it had THC and other things is important to test.